So, Priscilla, let's say somebody has just called us and they want to talk to us about same sex attraction. And their question is this too big for God to deal with? What do we say?
Well, prior to coming clean, I did not have a heart of compassion or mercy. And I would have said, yeah, this is too big. God
Mm,
can't do this. But over the last 8 years, I have seen lives changed.
hmm.
And it isn't too big for God. He can do all things. Nothing is impossible to him.
Well, if you're dealing with same sex attraction, either you or somebody in your family, we want to invite you into a special discussion with Niki Speed as she describes what God did in her life to rescue her from decades of same sex attraction and the trauma that occurred in her childhood. Hi, and welcome to Savage Marriage. This is Phil.
And this is Priscilla. We're sharing how God helped us overcome our past and fight for our future.
And what he did in our marriage, he can do in yours too.
This is Savage Marriage.
Well, here we are in the studio with Paul and Niki Speed, two of our great friends from Whatever It Takes Ministries. Glad to have you guys here.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
It is really good to be here. Thanks, guys.
You're
Oh,
welcome.
yeah, so glad to have you here because you'll be sharing your story. And Paul, we've heard your story a lot because you've been running Whatever It Takes Ministries for how many years now?
Well, that was over 20 years ago when Jenny and I started Whatever It Takes Ministries. Jenny was my late wife who passed away 6 years ago. And not knowing I was going to remarry and wondering what ministry would look like, God brought another incredible woman into my life. And that is 4 years ago. Nikki and I were married.
Wow, it's been awesome.
Best day of my life.
And so, Nikki, this was your first marriage.
Yes, it was. I've never been married before.
Yeah. And so there's a backstory here.
There's definitely a backstory.
And so what was happening in your life that this was your first marriage?
Actually, for most of my young adult life, lived a lesbian lifestyle.
So, Nikki, why don't you take us back? Take us back to the beginning. What was happening in your home of origin? Help us explain the backstory.
Okay, well, my backstory definitely started very early in my life. I grew up in a home that was very chaotic. My father was an alcoholic. My mom was emotionally distant. We just never felt a whole lot of love. When my father would drink, he would get physically abusive with my mom. I can remember at probably the age of 3 or 4 catching my dad abusing my mom, and I just went in my room and cried and asked God to make the devil go away.
What
You
what do
know?
you, what do you think the feelings were that started right there in your life early like that? What was going on inside you?
Fear.
Fear.
Fear,
Mhm.
and, what is wrong with my family, I can always remember just feeling very much alone and afraid.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, they ended up getting divorced because of all that when I was probably 5 years old, and my dad, he just wasn't around. After they got divorced, he's a truck driver, but he'd say he was gonna come pick us up, and then he would never show up. My mom, she just kinda went crazy, and she would be out every weekend drinking in the bars, and she'd leave us alone, and we were by ourselves at the ages of 5 and 8, at home,
Mhm.
and that went on for quite a few years, and my mom, because of her own past and issues, I can remember I would say, "I love you, mom," and she could never tell it back to you. So feeling rejection from my dad and absolutely no love or understanding, no compassion from my mom, I believe at a very early age, I like to call it, I developed like a love hunger. I just wanted somebody to love me, to see me, to want me. I never
Mhm.
felt wanted. As I got older, life with my mom was very difficult. She was controlling, like I said, very emotionally distant. So I wanted to go live with my dad. I always felt like when he was around, I had a decent relationship with my dad. I knew he loved me. I wasn't so sure he wanted me, but there was a short period of time I went and lived with him, and I thought that was going to be awesome. He had remarried. I had a stepbrother and two stepsisters, and now a stepmom. And I don't know, once I got there, I was like, "Okay, this is more difficult than I thought." My dad was very much into them, and it was a new school. I was already feeling lonely, disconnected, and now everything was new, and I just wanted to go back to my mom's.
So this beginning here in your family, it's not an uncommon story for people to hear and think about. But as you started going through this love hunger, as you described it, continued to manifest in your life, and
Absolutely.
and then what happened?
Well, by the time I was 11, I started hanging out with kids who were older than me, and I learned that they drank and they smoked pot, and that if I did that, I was accepted by them. So I started to do that at a very young age. My mom, again, was still partying, very distant, bringing home the guys, always very uncomfortable, always full of fear, when she'd bring these guys home. So I felt a refuge with those older kids and acceptance. I learned at an early age if I just became who people wanted me to be, then I'd be accepted.
Hmm.
I really didn't know who I was. I didn't feel loved for who I was, so I had to become somebody else. So I started hanging out with these kids, drinking, doing drugs, and one of my friend's uncles started noticing me, and I became friends with his daughter. I went over to her house one night and spent the night, and he had been watching me, and he gave me drugs and alcohol, and he raped me.
And you were how old then?
12. I can remember at the time thinking, "Oh my gosh, what is happening? What's going on?" And his daughter was actually in the same room. And I just remembered I had needed to keep quiet. I was definitely very much afraid. And I remember after it was over, just laying on the couch like, "Oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do?" I just wanted to run. And I did. The next morning, I just got up and left. And it was about a week later, he showed up at my house in the garage, and it startled me at first, and he stood there and he kinda whispered under his breath, "I love you."
Hmm.
And at that moment, something just shifted, and I went, "He loves me? Well, this is different." You know?
It's what you'd been searching for.
Yeah, I'm like, "Is this love?"
Yeah.
It's attention, he notices me, and because of that love hunger that I'd had for years, just wanting somebody, they say with kids that are acting out, bad attention is better than no attention, so they'll do whatever they have to get attention, and I believe that was me. It was so for the next year, I let him continue to rape me.
Hmm.
I kept going back, and
And
that
and and so you're using the word rape now
yes.
as an adult, but you didn't always use this word, right?
No,
When
no,
you were describing this, what was happening and how did it change to rape?
I went through WIT Ministries 4 Days to Hope, and
Mhm.
it was there, and I got some coaching after that from a gal who was with the ministry, and realized that I had a lot of shame because of that. I realized that it was easier to say I had sex with him because it didn't sound as bad, because if I said he raped me, then I was willingly letting somebody abuse me, and it was like I couldn't accept that, because I felt like it was all my fault. The first time was his, every time after that was mine, and I was just as much of a pervert and a monster as he was, and I hated myself. I felt dirty, I felt used, ugly, and yet weak, and just, like, who does that? Who lets a man do that to them? And so it was easier to say, "Oh, yeah," I had even, I think, for a time convinced myself that he really did love me, even though I hated it. He said all the right things, he would buy me things, and it felt nice, and that's what's the confusing part.
But you were only 12.
I understand that now.
Yeah.
And so it was a very confusing time. It was confusing because at one point, at one hand, it felt good, at the other, it's wrong. And it feels dirty, it feels ugly, and this is all wrong. And I can remember battling it, wanting out, not knowing how to get out of it. He continued to give me drugs and alcohol, which I liked because at that point it was just, let's just numb the pain.
Hmm.
And I knew where to get the alcohol in his house. And so one day I went to his house, got the alcohol. Some friends of mine wanted to hang out, and we went, drove her parents' car and totaled it. And I thought, great, this is my out. I'll tell him he gave me the alcohol. And it worked. Up in that point, nobody knew what was going on. There had been rumors around town, that things were going on. And so when he had to go to court for that, it did come out that he had raped me. I never up until later in my life, told anybody that went on for a year, because I did not want anybody to know that because then it was me.
That was the place of shame for you.
Totally. It's definitely where I got locked up. And after that, the need for love is still there. I kept seeking it with guys, but I learned very quickly, not that it's always true, but all guys want is sex. And again, I know that if I just give somebody what they want, then they'll love me. I continued to party. Actually, it got a whole lot worse. When
Mhm.
I was 13, I went to a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center because my parents could not control me. And then I actually talked about the rape for the first time in there. I didn't tell about the whole year, just the one time.
Again, because that's where the shame was, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
I didn't want people to think I was like him,
Yeah.
that if I willingly chose this, then I was unlovable.
Do you feel like the rehab center, because a lot of people choose rehab, is popular today.
Yes.
Did you feel like that helped you in a certain sense, didn't help you, or now you look back on that, was it a wrong message that you received? Was it not enough?
I I don't think it was enough because I wasn't willing to tell it all.
But did they focus that your problem is the behavior?
Yes.
Okay, was there any concern over what was going on inside of you?
No.
So you actually went there to dry up,
Yes.
not to drink and not to
Yeah.
smoke pot.
Exactly. Yeah. I wasn't a willing participant. I just did and said what I needed to do to get through it.
But in looking at what they were trying to accomplish through you, their definition of what success would have been just stop the behavior
Exactly. Just stop drinking, stop
versus
doing
heal the
drugs.
wound of your soul.
Yes. So I continued to drink when I got out of there, and by the age of 15, I was definitely back to partying. I had moved in with my dad because my mom could not control me still. And bless my dad, he tried, he just wasn't good at parenting, and he just let me do whatever I wanted. And unfortunately, because of that, I got pregnant at age 15 by a guy who was 21. He gave me all the alcohol I wanted. So that became the next very hard hurdle in my life, trying to decide, what do I do here? He wanted me to have an abortion, and I said, no, I can't do that. So he left. And then my dad's like, we're going to keep the baby. My mom's like, no, you need to do what's best for her. You need to put this child up for adoption. And it's really interesting, it says in Proverbs that sometimes it takes difficult situations for us to change our ways.
Mm.
And I can remember when I was young, before my parents got divorced, my dad every night would stand in the hallway and we'd recite the prayer, "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep." And I was like, okay, so I'm pregnant. I have no idea what to do. What is the best thing? Well, let's go to God. And so I started going, "Now I lay me down to sleep. Oh, God, help me. I don't know what to do." And it got longer and longer every night. And over that 9-month period, I truly believe God led me to adoption for my baby. And I, at the same time, was developing this relationship with God. And it, it really was the most difficult thing in my life that I've ever done.
So in the middle of your affliction, you really started to
Cry out to
cry
God.
out to God, right?
Yes, and I didn't know really a whole lot about him. I knew I had memorized Psalm 23 in Sunday school and my dad's prayer. That was about all I knew, but I just knew I could go to him, which I find interesting. I was
Mhm.
very much drawn to him for help.
In a
Yeah.
childlike
Yes,
way.
exactly, exactly. So with God's help, I did place her for adoption with a couple who'd been waiting for 13 years to adopt. I got to meet the mom, and God really worked it out. Everything I wanted, they agreed to, and I ended up needing a C-section, so I got to spend 4 days with her, which was another gift from God. But I also afterwards, I questioned it a lot afterwards. I cried. I wanted to die. The pain was just so much. And one night, several weeks into it, I'm just like, I can't do this. I was still talking to God. And I'm like, God, this hurts so much. Did I make the right decision? Was it out of fear because I didn't want her to be raised by my mom? My mom was still my mom at that point, and my dad couldn't. I can remember laying in bed going, I can't handle this pain, the emptiness that I felt, the loss, the regret.
Hmm. So you're feeling it again.
And I remember laying in bed telling God, I can't live this way. It just hurts so much. And I believe it was the first time I heard the voice of God. And he said to me, I understand, Nikki. I had to give up my son for you too.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh my gosh, you're kidding me. I don't get that. But I was really grateful somebody understood my pain.
Mm.
And I feel like I got a promise from God. And he goes, and you know what? Just like I got my son back, you'll see your daughter again.
Hmm.
And for the first time in weeks, I had peace. I was
Yeah.
like, okay, God,
Hmm.
okay, I'll take you at your word. And it still hurts, but I still miss her like crazy. And I'm looking forward to the day I get to meet her. But it was such a beautiful encounter with God, and it gave me hope because the crazy thing is I didn't really know anything about God. I didn't know about salvation.
So this is so interesting. So you look back on this, there was nobody coaching you through this spiritually, right?
No, not at all.
But somehow God's voice reached you.
Yes.
Are you able to look back on your life? I mean, you're only 15 at this time,
Yes.
and the rape you described happened at 12.
Yes.
So in 3 years, you've lived a lifetime of experiences.
Yes.
I mean, are you able to look back on it and see God's pursuit of your life?
Absolutely. I'm thinking about that. I look back and I can remember there was times I'd run to the park and I'd be so angry at my mom and just so angry at life. And I'd just go tell God all about it. And I didn't know him, you know?
Yeah.
And I just unleash it all, just, God, And so I guess it's really not a surprise that I turned to him, I guess, when I was pregnant, now that I think about it. But I think I've always just talked to him without
Mm.
really knowing him.
Yeah.
I knew
But he knows you.
exactly. He was pursuing me, definitely.
It's always interesting to me how sometimes we'll pray for people and we'll say, God, I just pray for John. Would you save God? Just go. And it's like we're begging God to do something
That he wants to
that
do.
he wants to save John more than we want him to be saved, right?
Exactly.
And he was loving you and pursuing you even in the middle of your pain and all the stuff that was happening
Yes.
to bring you to a point of knowing him.
Yes. It was beautiful.
Yeah,
I look back
and
at
his word, he says, "Come to me like a child," and that's what you were doing.
and I didn't even know it.
Right. That's beautiful.
Yeah. So I'd like to say my life turned around from there, but it didn't. I went back to school because I dropped out because I was pregnant. And the school I went to, they had this retreat. And it was interesting when I'm back to school. I'm like, okay, these people are going and they're coming back different. And it's a Christian retreat. I told all my friends, I'm going to go because I'm going to expose it. It's a cult. But inside,
Yeah.
I was curious. I
Mm.
wanted what they had because when they came back, they were so happy and so at peace. And so I went and I met Jesus.
Mm.
I remember it was a Catholic retreat, but I remember them going through the stages of the cross, and I'm like, so that's what you meant that night. You really do love me. And I remember talking to the priest and saying, can he forgive me for placing my child for adoption? And he's like, absolutely. So it's like the first time I really understood the gospel, met Jesus, got saved. Again, I'd like to say that my life turned around for about a year. I delve into Jesus. My family thought I really wasn't a cult. I'd come home from school, light my candles, and pray all night long and read the Bible. And it was like I was discovering this love I'd always longed for.
Mm.
But at the same time, I didn't know God was a healer. I didn't know God was a deliverer. And nobody ever told me that God wants to heal my heart, you know? So,
It's a message we miss a lot, isn't it?
yes.
God,
Yes.
we seem like the answer to everything is let's
Get saved.
let's get saved, right?
Well, yeah, because we think, okay, because God's word says, get born again, and now everything's made new instantly.
Yeah.
Well, that's true of our spirit, but our soul, the experiences that we've had is broken. And that's why God says, there's the sanctification process. He says, renew your mind. That doesn't happen instantly. And I really had no idea about any of that. I truly believed, okay, I'm saved. It's all new. Don't need to talk about anything. I'm good with that.
Mhm.
Because Nikki wasn't talking about any of that her past, it's gone. It's under the blood, So I tried for a long time through religious activity to be perfect because I feel like I really, even with God, felt shame.
Mm.
I wouldn't talk to God about those things, no, I wasn't going there with anybody.
So even though there's a spiritual event and salvation that has occurred in your life, the longing of your soul was still there.
Oh, yeah. Like, I felt God's love, but I still didn't believe people loved me.
Yeah.
How could they? And I really hid behind religious activity. Again, if I'm in this religious circle, and if I act perfect, then people accept me. I learned really quickly in the church that as long as you have all your ducks in a row, people think you're awesome
Mm,
and they love you. But the minute you mess up, you feel the hand,
yeah.
you feel the rejection. And so Nikki hid really well.
Then where did you go then for your look for relationships?
Well, I definitely was in Bible studies. I know I never got involved in a church, but the Bible studies, the retreat I went to where I met Jesus, I got involved with that. And that's when I met this girl. I'd never felt like anybody really loved me for me, and I always had to become something for somebody to like me, but she was the first person who pursued me for friendship, who actually listened to me. She's probably the first person I confided in about everything, and we did ministry together, and she had her past too, and I ended up moving in because, again, my relationship with my mother was still broken. I hated my mom. I remember saying, "I hate my mom." And so I moved in with her and her parents, and I remember one night we'd gotten emotionally meshed in a very unhealthy way, and I thought, "I just want her to hold me." And so I asked her, and she did. And then one thing led to another over the next several weeks, and she was actually the first person I was in a lesbian relationship with,
Hmm.
that it became physical.
And her first also?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we were both surprised by it, I guess you could
So
say.
so you weren't out looking for lesbian
No.
relationship,
No, it just happened.
and you didn't consider yourself prior to any of this as same-sex attracted or
No, I knew I had a draw,
okay,
I knew I longed for love. Guys weren't safe,
okay.
and guys reminded me of who I believed I was, a monster, a pervert. I tried to have relationships with men, and as soon as it would get physical, I ran away
Hmm.
because, again, it reminded me of who I was, this monster, this pervert, the shame. And so, we were in that relationship, me and that girl, for about 3 years, and she decided she wanted out. And again, it's probably the second hardest thing in my life because 'cause I'd finally opened my heart up to somebody and believed that they loved me, and look, they're leaving.
So when you think about that relationship, what felt so good to you? Was it the emotional? Was it the sexual? Was it the spiritual? I mean,
It was the emotional,
the
for sure.
emotional piece, and then the sexual became
It just became part of it. It was an expression of that,
yeah,
in a very wrong way.
okay.
But it was first time I'd ever experienced what I thought was love, and then to be able to express that in a sexual way, it got very confusing in my head because it felt very right.
Yeah, yeah.
There wasn't the fear, there wasn't the shame, you know?
So she moves on. You've gotta now navigate a breakup in this.
Again, it was like the pain was so comparable to losing my child. It was a loss. I wanted to die. And now I did have thoughts of, okay, I'm a lesbian. I like that. I like the way I want to feel that way again.
So
Um,
where is God in the middle of all this? I mean, he has saved you.
yes. And I believe I continued to talk to him. I wrestled a lot with, okay, is this okay? Is this not okay? And I'd say, God, how can something that feels so right be so wrong?
Mm,
I would wrestle, I would cry, I would yell at God. I'd say, I need to understand. If this is wrong, help me understand, which became my journey for 20 years.
mhm,
I started going to the gay bars. I can remember always thinking, I just got to find the right person, and we can just love each other, like it was with her,
mm.
but they'll want me, they'll love me, and I can love them. And it was a journey that never had an end.
Did it ever occur to you it could happen with a man at that point or not?
No.
No, it was just the men were taboo, they will hurt you, and that's not where we're gonna go with this.
Yes, because every time I attempted it, again, shame knocked on the door and said, flashbacks, and you chose that. And
Mm,
not only I was afraid of men. I felt like all men wanted was sex and they used you, yet I was just like them.
mm, yeah. But even in the middle of this, God is still pursuing your life.
Oh, he totally was because I was in and out of church and in and out of the lifestyle. Relationship would go back and I'd go back to church, try to live this perfect life. Nobody could give me any answers. I remember because my family was really good about letting everybody know I needed prayer. And so everybody knew about the life I was living. And so I'd go back and I'd be like, I don't understand. They'd be like, just stop the act, just stop sinning. It was all about the sin and the act, and nobody cared about my heart.
So we're back to almost the rehab center of if you can just stop doing this stuff, you'll be okay.
Yes. Yes.
Versus where is your heart and what's going on inside of you.
Yeah, because that was I could stop doing it for a while, but yet my heart still longed for it. And I thought I was longing for a relationship with a woman. I was really longing for love,
Hmm.
just in all the wrong places.
So this went way past, as you're saying, just the sexual expression or the sexual act, which we would say makes you a lesbian lifestyle. You really were looking for that acceptance, that love, that thing inside of you that you really felt for the first time with this other person, which just happened to be female.
Yes.
Well, it's the whole thing of wanting someone to know you, to be known,
Mm.
and someone loves you for who you are.
And that's how I felt with her. Yes.
The only person up till this point in your life. And now
Yes.
you're seeking it from anybody else.
Yes.
But within the church community, did you feel like, so did the church realize that you were struggling with same-sex attraction and you had a lesbian lifestyle?
Yes.
Do you feel like they singled that out as a greater sin than the other sins that were going on?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And what did that say to you about you?
It reiterated the lie I believed that I was awful, a
Yeah.
pervert,
A
monster.
Mm,
And I can't tell anybody. And so I became a really good hypocrite.
Hmm.
When I would go back to church, nobody knew. I did have an encounter with God, probably, I would say 15 years into this back and forth, where I went to church and one of the ministers, he just called me out. He didn't know me. My sister had invited me. I was in a relationship with a girl and just spoke to my situation. And I'm like, oh, because at that point I was like, God, I miss you. I felt his I felt like because again, it was all about performance. Like I didn't have a relationship with him if I didn't live perfectly. And I remember saying, God, I just miss you. But I don't know how to get out of this. Please help me. So I did. I went, and after that, I left the relationship I had with that girl and went back to church. And for probably a good 10 years, I looked really good on the outside. I became a missionary. I went to Kenya, had same-sex attraction over there.
so the desires were still inside, but the behavior was not occurring.
Exactly. And that's what tormented me. I know there's a lot of belief, well, if you're a Christian, you just have to live with these feelings as long as you don't act out on them. But God says it's what's in the heart.
Mm.
Jesus went deeper and he says, I want to give you a new heart, which means new desires. I want to heal your soul. I didn't know any of that and nobody could tell me.
Do you feel like leaving the United States and moving to Kenya? I mean, you were not like a Sunday only Christian here. You're changing your whole life.
Oh yeah. And I mean, I struggled in silence with porn and masturbation, watching lesbian movies. So there was this whole hidden life that nobody knew any. I looked really good on the outside.
Do you think that part of the move to Kenya was maybe this will solve my problems?
Absolutely. I knew I was running away,
Mhm.
and yet then when I got over there, it was still the same. The struggle was still the same. It didn't change anything.
Isn't that so interesting? Paul, I know you deal a lot with this in the ministry, right? That we are constantly looking for religious cover-ups to deal with the pain in our soul.
Yeah, and our pain is driving us. We know the feelings and it feels so legitimate, so valid to who I am as a person. So, and yet we can curb the behavior, maybe put some fences around, maybe even run from it. But yeah, that's what I find interesting in your story is, again, you had this inner turmoil. And at the time, how were you handling knowing, okay, I can stop this behavior, but am I going to feel this way the rest of my life? In other words, am I going to be is this God's answer for me to be tormented on the inside for the rest of my life?
Yes. I had a lot of conversations with God.
Mm.
Like, help me understand, why do I feel this way? I just it's almost like the longer that went on, the more the shame built. You
Mm.
know, that I'm being a phony to everybody, lying to everybody. I got this secret life, but yet I love God. But why won't these feelings go away? I'm doing everything I know I need to do, you know? And me and God, we never talked about those painful places.
Because the answers you were given to this point is stop the behavior
Yeah.
and you're going to be fine.
Yes.
But inside you knew you weren't fine.
No. No. And that was the confusing part.
Mm.
And so
At this point, did you have any idea how this tied back to shame, the experiences you went through as a young girl, the feelings of rejection, loneliness, how any of this was playing in, or you just felt, I've got these desires and it just happens to be lesbian desires?
exactly, I had no idea. I didn't have any idea I was full of shame.
Hmm.
None of that. I just knew I had these feelings and these thoughts and these desires, and I did not know how to change them. If God says they're wrong, God says I'm born again, if God says it's under the blood, why won't it go away?
Mm,
What's wrong with me?
What's wrong with me? More shame. Yep.
mm.
So I looked really good for a long time, and then about for about 10 years, and I was in church. They were going to make me a deaconess, preach, taught, all this stuff. And this gal comes to church and she's a lesbian. It was very obvious. Everybody knew it. And I thought, I'm going to help her because I'm still looking at porn, still masturbating, still watching lesbian movies. And I thought, this is my time.
You were looking for a
A
relationship.
relationship.
Mm.
And and it happened, and devastated my church, my family. I ended up walking away from the church,
So this
and
became known.
oh, yeah, and, like, the church even told people not to call me, not to have fellowship with me, because I was an embarrassment to the church.
Mm.
I was their trophy, and now their trophy had fallen off the shelf, and so I ended up leaving the relationship. I went back to church, and that was at that point, I'm like, "Okay, God, I'll give you 3 choices here. Either I'm gonna kill myself, I'm walking away from you and I'm gonna be a lesbian, or you gotta do something." And this counselor lady had started coming to church at the same exact time. I didn't like counselors. Again, shame said, "Don't expose." And a friend of mine, I opened up to her that I was suicidal. I just didn't wanna do life anymore. I didn't have any answers.
So let's talk about these feelings and that you were having that during this time, suicidal, all this stuff. You were stuck, right?
I was very stuck. I felt like I had done everything I was supposed to. I felt so hopeless. I thought there is no hope of change. I have to live this life of torment, like we like to say in the WIT community, white knuckling it. And I was
Mhm.
just tired of being a hypocrite and white knuckling it. And yet, at the same time, nobody could give me any answers. I thought there's no hope in this.
Isn't that interesting? That's the message the enemy speaks to us, isn't it? There's
Yes.
no hope for you. There's nowhere to go. There's no hope for your marriage. There's no hope for your sexual acting out.
Yes.
The best you can do is just white knuckle it and try to get through it.
Yes.
That was kind of the question you had for her earlier,
Yeah.
Paul.
Yeah. Because you had learned that you could somewhat control the outward behavior,
Yes.
but inside you were miserable
Yes.
because you knew you weren't changed. You weren't different. The God of the universe still didn't do anything with me.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so many people remain in that spot.
Hmm.
Yes, and they're in bondage. And
And
Jesus said, "I've come to set you free." But what does that look like?
Priscilla, I think when people come to us, they're looking for the 5 steps.
The easy way out.
Yeah.
If you can just give me the method, then everything's going to work out. Because our culture has done this method, 5 things you could do to have obedient kids, 6 things you could do to be promoted.
Hmm.
Everything is a method.
Yeah. But God did rescue your life out of this.
He absolutely did.
And he did not use a method.
He did not. Not the one I wanted.
Well, we are going to transition that to the next episode then on what happened in your life. How did God reach into this decades of trauma and challenges and everything that the decisions you had made and the shame and rescue you out and put you in a different path? Because today you're married to Paul.
Very happily married, by the way.
Very happily married. And that's how we wound up the first part of our conversation with Niki Speed. And if you want to hear more from Niki and Paul, we encourage you to go to their website, witministries.com. That's Whatever It Takes Ministries, where you can learn more about what Whatever It Takes Ministries does and the intensives that they're available for you.
Join us next time to hear the rest of Niki's amazing story. If you've liked what you've heard, please subscribe to our podcast and provide a rating to help others find us.
And you can also purchase our award-winning books, Savage Marriage, Triumph Over Betrayal and Sexual Addiction, and our Savage Marriage Study Guide on Amazon.com.
If you have marriage issues that you would like to talk to us about, just book an appointment on SavageMarriageMinistries.com.
Thanks for joining us, and remember, it's God who's at work in your savage adventure.